leave you out, David. Your public presentation, do you have anything for us? No. Okay. All right, so can I get a motion to approve the minutes of our October 5th meeting?
Motion to approve the minute.
Okay, is there a second?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Saskia seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Everybody was here? Okay, it's unanimous. All right, so actually it'd be helpful if I went to this agenda. Okay. So hopefully this meeting will be rather quick. That's my hope, is it will be quick. So what I'm going to do is just open up item 4A, the voting method of elected mayor, clerk, and police chief. It's going directly to the committee, so the floor is open for discussion.
Does staff have any presentation or anything, or should we just open discussion?
Yeah, I think we should go to discussion. I think there might be some input from staff. They did do some work, some due diligence on item 4B. And when we get to 4B, I think we'll go ahead and hear from staff.
Okay.
4A, I think we can dive into. Go ahead.
I suspect I've said this in previous discussions about ranked choice voting, but I think it is confusing to people in Santa Clara that are trying to vote if they're using one mechanism to vote for council seats and a different method to vote for mayor and clerk and police chief. And if we are, from an educational training point of view and from a voter understanding how things work point of view, if they are ranking the people that they want on city council, they should be ranking the people that they would like as mayor. And therefore, I recommend that we use the same method, ranked choice voting for mayor, city clerk, and police chief.
Okay. Mary?
I totally agree. And I also would say that I think another reason that I would support ranked choice voting for these is for the same reasons that we talked about ranked choice voting as a proportional method. I think there are also ways in which it's easier for minority constituencies, whether they're political or racial or other kinds of minorities, to get their candidate of their choice elected if we use ranked choice voting.
Okay. Is there anyone out there that has a differing viewpoint? So, Steve?
I would just like to throw out that we've made a carve out for the mayor, the city clerk, and for the police chief. So it's really not a big leap to make the way we vote for them different as well. It's worked for for them being the majority or plurality for many, many years. And since we've made that carve out, I just don't think it's a big leap to not continue that way.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Teresa?
I think that we absolutely need to have a unified voting system, because I think the message to the people that are actually voting is the system doesn't work in all cases, and that's not the message we want to give. We're choosing to change our voting methodology because it's better. It should be better across all cases. So I would feel quite strongly about that.
Given the fact that there seems to be, it's almost unanimous, that we follow the ranked choice voting. For council, does somebody want to make a motion in regards to just being consistent in how we elect a mayor, police chief, and city clerk?
I'd be honored to make that motion, that we change the method of election for all elected officials to be single transferable vote by means of ranked choice voting.
Okay. Is there a second?
Oh,
I will second it. I do have a...
And the timeline would be in 2020, which would be the first time that the registrar of voters would be able to accommodate that.
And that would be for police chief and city clerk, not mayor.
Correct. And then mayor would be 2022.
Would be in 2022.
Right.
Okay. Keith?
I would second it. Mechanically, would city attorney then be coming back with proposed draft language with those changes, or Are you comfortable making those changes and just having that go to City Council on December 5th? Without us directly approving the language that you would draft?
No, I don't think, I mean, we already have language. It would just be adding those offices to
Okay.
it.
I'm happy to second the motion.
How does single transferable work when there's
Is
only?
your mic on, by the way?
Yes, it is, but
Okay.
again.
By the way, we don't have to boom into these.
I just can't hear it.
No, yeah, I got yelled at a little bit because I was too loud, and I guess back there it blows out their ears. So if we're just a little bit elevated, you know,
Yeah, that's
it
fine.
seems
How
to
does
work
the
good for them.
concept of single transferable vote work with a single office?
So it is almost like instant runoff. In this case, it would be exactly like instant runoff.
Well, I understand ranked choice. It's more the single transferable vote.
So
I concur. I'm not sure it is single transferable
would
vote
be-
for
I
a
don't think it is
single
either.
office.
So it'd be instant, single transferable vote is instant runoff with the difference that when you have multi-seats, which in this case is just a single seat, any excess votes get transferred off. So in this case, since there is not a second seat that is up for grabs in the same race, then it's exactly like instant runoff voting.
So it's just simply ranked choice.
It's just simply ranked choice.
Correct, correct.
Okay.
But again, for the consistency from a voter standpoint, that they are using the same system, I guess they're going to be ranking on the ballot in both cases,
Yeah,
so.
I would just say ranked choice.
Okay, so I would amend my motion
Okay,
to just say ranked choice voting,
okay,
rather than single transferable vote by means of ranked choice voting.
okay. And Keith, you
Second is
second?
fine with that.
Is there any further discussion? I'll take public comment. Steve, you were first. You have 2 minutes.
It's the same thing, because you're not giving up extra votes.
My name is Steve Chesson, and I'm president of Californians for Electoral Reform. I support the motion. I just wanted to point out that you could call it, if you wanted to, single transferable vote, because it still is a single transferable vote. It only gets transferred if their first choice loses, doesn't get enough votes to win. As a matter of fact, the Republic of Ireland uses the single transferable vote to elect both their lower house of parliament and their president, and in their laws or constitution, they call it the single transferable vote, even when they're electing the president. But you could also just call it ranked choice voting. The terminology is the same. Basically, when you have the single transferable vote and you're only electing one person, you don't ever have an excess surplus to transfer. So it doesn't matter whether you call it single transferable vote or ranked choice voting, it would still be the same. But basically, I support the motion. I think it's important that the voters' experience is the same when they're ranking candidates for city council, as well as for these other offices. Also, it has positive benefits in that it eliminates the spoiler effect. It eliminates the problem of vote splitting. It eliminates the problem of someone getting elected as mayor. Say you've got 4 people running for mayor, somebody could get elected with as little as 30% of the vote under your current plurality system. By going to ranked choice voting, you guarantee that someone needs to get a majority consensus in order to be elected as mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. David?
My name's Dave Kavlicek, for the record. 2 things. One is when Hosam said almost like instant runoff voting, it's not just almost like, it is what's generally known as instant runoff voting, you know, the special case of single transferable vote for a single winner. The other thing is, besides from the general benefits of using instant runoff voting for the single winner offices, for education, it's important to do the change over to it at the same time as the changes for the city council seat. So it probably shouldn't be fixed year, but basically saying at the same, so that just in case something is delayed or miraculously made early or something, we don't want to be out of sync between when start using ranking to vote for city council and ranking to vote for the single winner offices, elected offices in the city, given that it will be on the ballot with an election that includes a bunch of other offices at state, county, whatever level, that won't be ranking voting, and it'll be a whole lot easier to explain that you rank candidates for City of Santa Clara offices and not for these others, as opposed to you rank candidates for these particular City of Santa Clara offices and not for these others. If Santa Clara had a standalone election, not consolidated with a bunch of other things, it would be different considerations, but given that it's on with a whole bunch of other things, it's important to have all of the Santa Clara things be as close to one another as possible if we're going to have to educate people about how to do things. Thanks.
Thank you. So before I call for the vote, Hosam, do you want to keep your motion as is?
How do people feel about, again, using the same language as the council seats?
Keith?
Do you think it would make it easier for voters to just see the same terminology used in both scenarios? I mean, effectively, it's the same. So the question is, do we want to make it easier for voters by using the same terminology? Or do you think it's a wash?
I am comfortable letting the city attorney draft things. I mean, they may just end up being 3 more offices in the exact same clause that talks about how things are voted, how offices are voted for.
I think a continuity of what we're expecting, what we're training, and the message that we're sending out is really important. So my personal preference would be that whatever we ask for the city council, we use the same language terminology for the other elected positions. I just think that continuity of message is important.
Steve?
Yeah, I just want to point out, and continuity is important and consistency is important, but what we're saying is we're going to elect council members by district, but we're not going to do that with the mayor, and we're not going to do that with the police chief. We're not going to do that with the city clerk. So there's already a carve-out for that. So I don't think it's inconsistent to have a different voting method. I think it's comfortable to make the same voting method, but I don't think it's all that far off to say we've already made this carve out, so therefore there's a different way we're going to count votes. But it's not a hill I'm going to die on.
I think the other issue is, when I think Mary brought it up, is that there is a higher probability of getting in a minority candidate elected. And I think that was the origin, the genesis of why we're here, was to look at that. And I think what we're doing by doing this is that we're actually addressing not just the council, but we're addressing all the other elected positions. And so I do think from convenience, it makes sense because people are going to get, they're going to eventually learn this is how we do it in Santa Clara. And I do see your point, Steve. I see it 100%. But I think in the spirit of why we're here, which is to hopefully increase the minority population as far as getting them into elected positions, I think this lends itself more to that than the old method of doing things, which is kind of just a popularity contest.
I mean, the other thing is, this is not unprecedented even in our neighboring cities, like where you have a primary and then you have the general, right? Where you get top 2 winner from the primary go to the general. It's the same it's the same concept where instead of having, ranking 5 or 7 different candidates or even 3, you're going down to the top 2 and then taking a revote so that one person gets a majority vote. So I don't think even having a carve out is, it's not so far-fetched for voters to see that, okay, we want to make sure that whoever wins that office is a consensus candidate, which is what other cities that use primary systems are that's the purpose of doing that. So I think, again, for a lot of the reasons that were mentioned, getting broader diversity, when you have multiple candidates winning, you can have somebody win with only 30% of the vote. All these sorts of reasons are good reasons to continue to leverage the benefits of the ranked choice voting system, even for those single member offices.
So do you want to amend your motion?
I'd like to amend my motion to mimic the language that is used for the city council offices. So back to my original motion, which was a motion to change all of the voting method for all of our elected officials mayor, city clerk, and police chief by single transferable vote by means, to single transferable vote by means of ranked choice voting.
Say it again.
Change the system for electing our mayor, city clerk, and police chief to single transferable vote by means of ranked choice voting. Did I say it right? I think, no, I think it's single
Ranked
transferable.
choice voting by means of single
Yes.
transferable vote.
I think also known as is what we have in our
Okay,
current
so
charter
just to mimic
language.
what we have for city council.
Why don't you just say to match what's on the city
That's what I
council?
said.
Oh, great,
That's what I
great,
said,
perfect.
yeah. But just to remove ambiguity, single transferable vote.
Now, the other question is, just real quick, City Attorney, are you going to also put in there, because it's not going to be the same line item as council, because the dates in which we're going to implement it are different, right? So there's 2 positions to be implemented in 2021, to be implemented in 2022, so I think that should be spelled out.
No, no, 20,
Potentially spelled
20
out,
and
but-
22. 20 and 22, not 21 and 22.
No, 2020 and 2022.
Correct.
Yeah, there'll be 2 in 2020,
Right.
which will be the chief and the clerk, and 2022 will be the mayor.
Correct.
And so perhaps we should just leave it up to the city attorney to allow him to draft it. I think he
And I
has a
think
good
Keith
handle on
mentioned
it.
something about, or was, no, sorry, it might have been Teresa who mentioned about if it's not available by then, right? So we have language, or was it?
We already have language.
We already have language in there for the city council just to match that. I think he knows
Yeah.
what we're trying to do.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, may I?
yeah.
It's important to note also that following 2020, say something, dramatic were to happen at City Hall and our mayor were no longer in her seat, we had a special election, that may happen prior to 2020 or 2022,
Right.
but after 2020. So we may want to craft that language to simply say that the city will move to overall that election system by 2020 and in subsequent years, or as soon as it's feasible. And that if we did have a special election in 2021, say, and we had access to that election system, we'd still want to use it and not be limited to not using it until 2022 in the mayor's seat.
So I don't think we need to have a discussion about that. That's a great point. I think I'd leave it to the city attorney to go ahead and incorporate that into what you're going to draft. I don't think we need to talk about it anymore.
I think the language we drafted already says something pretty much like that.
Yeah.
It's just really adding the offices. That's really it.
Exactly.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? One opposition? Anybody abstaining? Okay, great. So the motion passes. Thank you. Let's go to 4B. Provide city officers with duty to report city charter violations, establish complaint process for city staff who report suspected charter violations, provide whistleblower protection for those who report. I'd like to hand it over to the city clerk, city attorney, the other one, city manager's office.
Me? Okay. Well, mandatory reporting is, in my mind, an extremely serious thing to put into the law. And this particular measure certainly does not belong in a charter. I'm not really sure what it's intended to accomplish, or what would we really be remedying in the situation. I don't even know where this came from. So do we know? Oh, it came from you. Okay. Okay, that'd be good.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily have upon reflection, I think that it also probably doesn't belong in the charter and maybe belongs more in city ordinance. But the idea, initially I was just reviewing the charter and noticing that there's all these places in which, violating various parts of the charter are, supposed to be misdemeanors. And I thought, well, that seems weird, but who's actually paying attention to that? And so it seemed weird to have penalties set up without any enforcement mechanism, without any way for people to actually say this has happened. Or so, for example, and I don't really think that there's lots of violating of the charter happening. So I don't think it's I have reason to believe it's a problem so much as I work in civil law enforcement myself. And if you don't have an enforcement mechanism where people can actually say this happened and know who to go to, then it doesn't matter that there's a penalty because nobody's enforcing it. Nobody has a way to say, I think this happened. So for example, in a city charter, it says things about how the council and the mayor shouldn't directly give orders to city staff, that they should go through the city manager. But, so if a city staff member who's like in the planning department has the mayor come to them directly and say, you need to do this, there's nothing, like, who do they go to and how do they say this is inappropriate, other than coming as an individual citizen to city council meetings? And that seems like a little difficult for them. So it was more just a question. And initially I thought maybe there wasn't actually the power in the city charter for city council to set up through the ordinance a way for them to do it. But I actually kind of, upon reflection, think there probably is. It just seems like a good idea that if you have in the charter X, Y, and Z violations of the charter is a misdemeanor, there needs to be like a way for city staff or for members of the public to say, I think there was a violation and someone needs to look into it.
I would probably argue that, I know under state law that there's whistleblower laws, so you can't discriminate or retaliate against somebody who, brings forward something to the organization. I would imagine that Human Resources has a policy for all employees that, and there should be, if there's not in the city handbook, there absolutely should be something in there that talks about bringing forth anything such as, something that's unethical or whatever the case is. Would either, I haven't read it, but I would hope that they have it in there because most manuals, every company manual has that component that gives people an avenue, whether it goes to Human Resources or the Office of the City Manager. I would imagine that employees would have a means to disclose if they felt that they were being coerced or something, they were being asked to do something unethical or whatever the case is. I think the problem comes in is, what if a council member who's not, an employee technically goes to another, an actual employee, and I think that that employee would be covered under anything that's in the human resource manual, or even I would argue state law, that, if they're asked to do something unethical, they have a right to notify either their manager or Human Resources or the Office of the City Manager that they're being asked to do something unethical. Because to retaliate against that person, I could almost guarantee you, as being in HR for 16 years, you wouldn't fare very well in court. There's not many juries that are going to side with a council member coercing somebody to do something that was unethical. It's probably not a case the city would want to take on. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the handbook or if you have a procedure, but if, let's say hypothetically, Rania has a whistleblower because she sees that we're appropriating money wrong in finance, and she wants to bring that to somebody, to the attention of the city, and being protected under the Whistleblower Act, Ruth, what would she do?
Well, let me just start off by saying the city does have a whistleblower policy, and it was discussed actually pretty extensively more recently as we were embarking on auditing of the stadium. And then so it was very clear that the council wanted to make sure that all employees knew that we had this policy in place and that there were protections if they wanted to come forward. So if there are other things that employees or other people see, that we do have a policy in place to protect people.
So what would a member of the public do if they thought that there was a problem? Because like, as we were just looking, it's not on the website, for example, that there's whistleblower protections in the city. So, but the whistleblower piece was for city staff, right? But like if a member of the public, do they only come through public presentations to city council? Like if there's no complaint process, then they have to do it.
Whistleblower.
It's not, member of the public doesn't need a whistleblower protection.
No,
but they may need a way to be able to say, I think.
Well, anybody, we have, believe me, we get all kinds of email accusing all kinds of people of doing all kinds of things.
I understand.
So my 2 points about my comments on this are, I seriously do not believe it belongs in the charter. And number 2, the mandatory nature. It's one thing to create a process that's available to people if they choose. It's a whole nother thing to make it a violation of the charter itself to not report something. And then the other real problem is we really have, other than a misdemeanor, which I suppose maybe I would bring, I don't know. Our level of resources to prosecute criminal violations is very limited. And, you know, certainly the district attorney has some power to bring certain misdemeanors, and then we have certain powers in the city attorney's office to bring misdemeanor charges. But you got to understand, it's a very difficult thing to do when you're actually part of the city. So criminal prosecutions for violation of the charter are typically not seen very often. You know, in constitutional law, there's a concept known as, you know, between checks and balances, and, you know, that people look to basically the different branches, if you will, of the government, and here at the local government. I mean, the city manager would say, if there's too much, if for example, a council member is quote unquote violating the section on councilmanic interference, then that's a conversation that the city manager has with the council member. I don't think it's the kind of thing where we want to create some kind of prosecutorial forum where everybody's bringing charges against each other that's vetted through some kind of criminal process. It's typically not the best way to deal with it.
By no means was I suggesting that we should, so much as that there should be, the real theory behind it was just a sense of like having more transparency about how folks, members of the public, city staff, city council members, whoever, could say, you know, I'm concerned about this. I want a way to, it can be informal. I mean, there's all kinds of other consequences that don't, outside of what's currently in the charter, that could be set up through ordinance, including a conversation, including a formal letter, including, you know, all kinds of things that don't have to be a criminal investigation so much as it seems that it's, you know, in practice of, you know, good and transparent and open government, there needs to be a way for members of the public to feel confident that, for precisely the reason you were just saying, that like it's difficult as an internal city attorney to, for example, deal with the small p politics and also the actual resources of a criminal investigation. Of course it is. So, but things could start well before then to make sure that there's, you know, just a process for people to be a part of. I agree with you, though, that it shouldn't be in the charter, and so to that extent, this could be an entirely moot conversation.
Does anybody feel this should be in the charter? Is there anybody that wants to make an argument that it should be in the charter?
I just have one other question before we move on. And it's interesting you brought up councilmanic interference, because it's one of the few charter sections that says if you're guilty of that, you're guilty of a misdemeanor and should be removed from office. Is that a city attorney's? I mean, you guys do that. District attorney doesn't do that, right? Is that you guys?
Well,
do that?
yeah, municipal code or city code or the charter would be enforced by the city attorney.
Okay.
As a criminal matter, yeah.
So going with Mary's argument, if somebody thought somebody was in violation of that section, do they bring it to you or the city manager? Or
I think
how does that happen?
That should be outlined in the employee handbook under the whistleblower clause.
You think I would know that, but I don't.
I mean, it's you got to understand that's a very, although it sounds serious and it's a strange word, councilmanic, I had to look it up. It's in it. But what does it mean? Does it mean every time a council member calls a member of staff without the city manager knowing it, you've had a misdemeanor committed and they should be removed from office? Well, I can tell you that we'd have no council members sitting there if that's what that meant. So it's really very difficult. It's a difficult threshold to understand. And there's a lot of sections of the charter that are like that. And, you know, I mean, it's a charter is a document that's meant to guide the city at a high level. It's not meant to control specific behaviors, except perhaps where it is very specific about behavior. And so, you know, it's really not meant as a criminal code. It's meant as more guidance. So I just, since you've already decided you don't want to put it in the charter, I'd say we just kind of, you know, if you want to bring it up at a council meeting, you know, individually as, you know, what about this and what should we do about charter violations? I think you'd be free to do that. But we have, it's a difficult situation to talk about. I mean, I can talk about, yeah, it's in the charter and you need to do this, but to actually police it in that sense of the word is very difficult. And there's a lot of interpretation that has to go on.
I actually think it would make more sense that that perhaps this line item be passed on to the Ethics Committee and let the Ethics Committee decide if it's something they want to take on. I do agree with the city manager. I mean, if somebody was going to be removed from council, it would be, we're not talking about somebody typing a quick letter to City Hall. It would be over the top as far as the politics and as far as by the time anything got done, we would all probably be retired and moved on to the person would probably term out. I mean, just being honest, I mean, to actually find, to actually define what does it mean to be in violation of the charter, I mean, it would have to be pretty egregious. I mean, extremely egregious because as the city attorney said, I got you, Keith, as the city attorney said, there are, and I've worked at the Parks and Rec Department for 4 years. I can tell you, I got yelled at from everything from no toilet paper in the bathrooms to horses in the park. How come I can't ride my horse in the park? How come the water level isn't higher? Are you going to put more crawdads in the pond? I mean, so when you work with the public in that capacity, it takes all types to what is it? It takes a village. And there are certainly plenty of people in the village that are willing to express their opinions. I mean, I remember one night a woman came up and said that we were planting some robots or something in her head, and that's what she believed. So I think the city manager, the city attorney, arguably the city clerk, maybe, I'm sure they get dozens of people that are unhappy with certain things. But in this particular case, I think it at best should go to the Ethics Committee, let them decide if it's something for council to take action, but I don't think it belongs in the city charter whatsoever. So that's my opinion, Keith.
I will make a motion to recommend to the Ethics Committee of the Santa Clara City Council that they consider whether by ordinance or policies to adopt a mechanism to report city charter amendments or city charter violations, establish complaint processes for city staff, and provide whistleblower protection if it's not already included in state law.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, is there any discussion?
Yes. I think our city manager already said there is whistleblower protection.
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure about the last part.
But hold up, because if there is already whistleblower protection, then we're making a recommendation to the Ethics Committee to implement something that's already implemented.
I think
I don't get it. I just don't get it, and I think we may lose credibility for doing something that's making that kind of a recommendation. I'm all for it, by the way, and I love that the city has that, despite how difficult it may be to actually enforce. Maybe if our recommendation is to figure out ways to make it more effective, I would support that.
I don't
want
to go there.
I don't want to go there either. But my point is, I don't see the point of referring it to the Ethics Committee if it's already in place, because this says nothing about the general citizenry or the general community. This is talking about city officers. It says provide city officers, and if you want to even make it more general, city employees. But they already have whistleblower protection on anything that is in violation of a charter or a complaint process or blah, 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 blah. And then the only thing about here, which I think I'm a little bit scared about, is the words duty, which makes it mandatory for them to report. And if somebody, I'd love it if everybody could report something bad, but there are some people who just are scared of retaliation. And despite how many times you can tell them or reassure them that retaliation is illegal under the law, they're just like, psst, I ain't gonna do it. I ain't gonna risk it. I ain't gonna risk my job, my family security, my pension, my whatever, and they're just gonna let it slide. But then if it's an obligation for them to report it, now the person who is supposed to be a good guy, you've made them into a criminal because they were too scared to report it. So I think that's not fair to that person. You should encourage them to report it, not penalize them for not reporting it.
So Keith, would you like to change your motion to just eliminate this? To just basically say that we're going to take no action on 4B?
I mean, we can always vote for it. I mean, that's fine. I just,
I mean, just as a point
I
of
mean, I guess
clarification.
to answer you, you, I think, said you don't like this because whistleblower protection already exists. But that's,
the 2
that,
points. I
that's
brought up
the,
the 2 points, yeah, sorry.
that's the third clause in that. My motion was to recommend the Ethics Committee look at and consider adopting by ordinance or by policies methods to allow city officers and city staff to efficiently report suspected violations of the city charter. For good or bad, I looked at the city website. The city website does not have the word whistleblower on it anywhere. It does not have hotline anywhere. If I thought something was wrong in the city, I looked at the city's website, I would not know who to call. So I think there's room for improvement.
So can you rephrase your motion for me? Or just restate it?
I will try to restate what I think I said the first time. Did you write down, or would you have to have looked at the recording in the future?
I did write it down.
Okay. Do you want to read it off, or should I try and say it again?
Let me, to recommend for the Ethics Committee to review and determine if this should be considered, city ordinance or policy, and then I was going to include the language that was in the agenda there.
So my objection to that, once again, if it's going to include the language in the agenda, is particularly the word duty, to my second point, right? Which is, now you've made it an obligation.
Sorry? The city officers are 4 people? I mean, how many city officers are there? Excluding the council, which I don't know if
I don't know what you mean by officer.
So it's a summarization of what I had originally said, which was, right, like the elected officials was what I initially had said. But we could, I mean, honestly, I think that it's reasonable to ask certain people in any government to be mandatory reporters. There are things for which I am a mandatory reporter as a federal government employee. So I think it's reasonable, but not for literally every city staff member.
That's what I want to know.
But so my thought initially, my suggestion initially was the elected city officials. So that would be council, mayor,
And
city
my
clerk,
thought
police
was that
chief.
was, city officers was a very small set of people. It might include the city attorney, it might include the city manager,
But I would.
but I don't think it included everyone in the Parks Department.
No.
I mean, do we have a fundamental, I mean, are we trying to fix something that isn't broke? Are we trying to add something because we're worried about something that hasn't necessarily happened in 100 years? Or you know, I mean, because I'm almost feeling like we're
I
trying
will
to
say
shove
we have had multiple people stand up and allege violations of city ordinances.
But that would be, I don't know. I guess I look at the political climate and I say that if somebody was egregiously doing something that wasn't in line with the charter, that at some point somebody would bring that forward. I feel like we're trying to make something that we don't need to make something out of nothing. I don't think, I mean, nobody came to me and said, boy, I'm concerned that there's, and I'll tell you where this really originated from. This really originated from the whole stadium thing, where the finance director was not, people thought the finance director was withholding information, and, you know, there wasn't that level of honesty, and the police chief wasn't, you know, being forthcoming with the numbers as far as how much time was being spent at the stadium, and that's where all this mistrust came in, of are these people doing something that, you know, are they hiding something, are they, you know, that's where I think this really all kind of started, at least for me. I think that's when it started, but nobody has come to me in 6 months and said, we need this in the charter. We need an ordinance that says this. You know, I almost feel like we're just putting more paint on the canvas because we have some extra paint. I mean, and maybe the canvas is just fine the way it is.
Well, I mean, to be fair to the person, sorry, but I think to be fair to Mary, who brought this forward, I mean, I don't know, do you feel that way? You brought it forward, so, I mean,
Sure.
I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss the reason you brought it forward, but at the same time, I'm not so sure making reporting a duty, reporting violations as a duty. Again, I'm a little hung up on that.
So I think ultimately, I think it's a better decision for like city council to think about than for us, which is why I was sort of withdrawing this from like the charter and why I'm supporting Keith's suggestion to like refer it to the ethics committee, because, you know, I don't know enough about sort of the internal politics of what's been going on in our city. The reason I've brought it forward is mostly out of a sense of looking through the charter and realizing that there are, you know, some serious penalties contemplated, but there doesn't seem to be. And I think to some extent, with the way Brian's talked about sort of the challenges of doing this internally, kind of confirms to me that there is like maybe something sort of missing in terms of like an ability to have an independent or an ability to kind of overcome what is an honestly reasonable challenge politically of saying, you know, a public official is doing something wrong. Like that's actually a really hard thing to do and to say. And that's why, you know, like in the federal government, agencies have inspector generals that are independent and that have, you know, terms that are like 10 years long so that they're politically independent as well. So it was, to Tino's question, no, I don't necessarily think that there's a whole bunch of, you know, malfeasance going on at all. I think it's more just a question of like, if we as a city pride ourselves in having a transparent, open, and ethical government, which I think we do, that this is something that should be either improved, made more open and transparent if it already exists, or created to the extent that it doesn't exist.
And I'm not discounting what you're saying, but what you're saying doesn't belong in the charter. And we're here to discuss the charter.
No, but he made a his motion was to refer it to the ethics committee, and I think that's a fair.
Yeah, so
say.
my point is this doesn't belong in the charter, so we still have the motion, which is we can send it to the ethics committee, and they can ponder it and see if they feel there's merit to it, or they feel that, you know, perhaps they should look into it, you know, they should assign it to staff, they should give it to the next group of citizens that come together. I mean, I'm all for that. But I mean, for this charter, it's not a part of, I don't think it's a part of the charter. So I think if we go with what with what Keith is saying is, we're just gonna forward that on to, because we're not gonna solve it here. We're not gonna solve it tonight. I think it would be probably prudent to send it to the ethics committee because that's one step lower than council. And then if they feel that it's worthy to go to council, then they can escalate it to council, right? They can take a look into what you're saying, which does have merit. It absolutely has merit.
There's no harm done
No, I mean, no, we can send it to them and say, hey, we talked about it, we looked at it, we just didn't feel it was a charter thing, but perhaps you might want to look at this because there was some concern. I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. Yeah, I just don't think it's at the charter level. So there's a motion. Is there any public discussion? Steve, are you awake? Okay, just checking. Because we have no loitering, so you can't sleep. You got to be awake. Okay. All right.
Can you repeat the motion?
Jody, with all due respect, if you come into this now, I'm never going to forgive you.
We have to repeat the motion or she can't vote.
I can't vote if I don't know what the motion is.
Well, we don't, well, I'm just kidding. Yeah, go ahead. It's like, technically, Jody, we don't need your vote. But anyways, no, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm rushed over from another
Womp,
meeting,
womp,
just to
womp.
be-
I know.
Mr. Chair,
So,
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think that that's, in summary, I think what you're saying is you're making a referral to the Ethics Committee to consider a review of the methods of reporting by city staff and/or the public of potential charter violations.
That was the motion.
That's the motion.
Thank you.
I thought it was a little more prescriptive than that, but I liked what I heard, so.
I really like what I heard. I thought that was eloquent and so.
I'm fine to substitute that verbiage, which I cannot repeat
And
as my motion.
I will second that amendment.
Oh, there's a second by Mary. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, can we get a motion to adjourn? Oh, public presentation. Is there any more public presentation?
Yeah, is this your last meeting?
Yep. Speak now or forever hold your peace. And I wish you all the best in getting something changed, but the floor is yours. Yay.
You really need to give yourselves a round of applause for the hard work that you have done these many months crafting a charter amendment for the city of Santa Clara that will improve its elections of its city officials. And of course, after it gets put on the ballot, there will need to be a campaign. And I would hope many of you would get involved in that campaign to get it passed, because it's not going to pass itself. And other than writing the argument in favor of it, I don't believe the city council can actually campaign on the charter amendment itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second? Mark a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Anybody want to stay longer? Well, good job. We finished in November. We finished before the holiday season. So round two for us, this is our second round of charter review. You never know if there's a third, but anyways, thanks everybody for all the hard work.
So what's the next step, real quick? Is the next step, is this, it's gonna go to council when? Do we know when it's gonna go to council?
December 5th, there'll be a report to council, but council will probably not take action to put it on the ballot until sometime maybe late February, early March.
And is the report to council gonna include our decisions from today as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's gonna be the full package, basically?
Yes.
Sweet.
You can keep it. I was going to say, as a souvenir, you're welcome to keep it, put it on your desk at work.